am LUKAS MAIER. I'm an artist. Been going to U of C for 5 years. I'm almost done, thank goodness. I'm German-Canadian, so I grew up in Canada, but I also, as often as the money comes in, have been traveling back to see my family in Germany as much as possible. I grew up going to a German bilingual school, which makes sense. Pretty much all of my family speaks German, so it was always good to have that as a second language. I went to school in Boness, which was amazing because I was able to be surrounded by all different kinds of people. My neighborhood is split, very much so. So where I'm at is there's apartments, there's a trailer park, and there's like small single family dwelling sort of area, versus the top half is like extremely wealthy. So I think that definitely influenced my upbringing, is the dichotomy between those places. Traveling back to Germany, I always stayed with my family. They come from a city called Dessau. It's most famous as the place that's had the Bauhaus school for the longest amount of time before it was, eventually shut down by the Nazis. It's in East Germany, so the fact that it's in East Germany played a big part in my upbringing. My dad was born here, but his parents are from Germany. They emigrated after the war, whereas my mom's side of the family is from East Germany. And so yeah, after the wall came down, that's how they got the chance to meet. And yeah, with my dad being a musician, that was kind of the route that I was going on originally. I grew up playing classical guitar, and I did a lot of music competitions like that when I was younger. Then I kind of moved on to like electric guitar and bass guitar and was playing with bands and things up until kind of high school, where I stopped. But in middle school, I started taking my first few art classes, and I had an art teacher who was really supportive of me. And originally I just taken the classes because I thought it was something fun to do, but I ended up kind of going further along that, and my uncle is also a practicing artist in the city, and with my dad being a musician, my uncle being an artist, I ended up realizing that that was something that I could do. A lot of my work kind of talks about recontextualizing textures, marks, and the like left on urban spaces, and kind of the individual narratives that all of those different marks have. Each of those marks tells the story of a person who inhabits a location, and whether it's, someone leaving their gum on the wall, someone's bike tire sliding against the door, a person applying graffiti, a person removing graffiti, whether subconsciously or consciously, all of those marks have a personal and a political quality to them. And I want people to see those marks in a formal setting, to kind of have a conversation about the individual lives of the people who leave those marks, and really kind of talking about how many people inhabit the spaces we live in, as well as forcing people to consider why those marks are there in the first place. For the longest time, I worked with acrylics just because it's, it's cheap, it's easy to come by. And before I was working with acrylics, I worked with spray paint because I come from like sort of that school of art. Since a really young age, I started noticing graffiti all over the place. New tags would pop up all the time, or like bigger like throws or pieces or whatever, and then they'd disappear. And some of them would stick around depending on where they were. And I just kind of thought that was really interesting. I wondered who did that sort of thing, and why they did it and what it meant. I don't know, it felt almost like kind of like a superhero or a supervillain kind of a thing, depending on how you look at it. I don't know, I guess when I got older, I really started to admire the expressiveness of it, and the freedom that that genre of painting has. And my experience within that culture, whether it be documenting or otherwise, sort of led me to use spray paint as one of my first mediums. Actually, like the first painting I ever did was only done with spray paint. But lately, the color of oils and the fact that they take so long to dry, and I can really take my time with mixing them. Oils have been my big thing, but for some of my pieces, like my tile paintings, I've been doing a bit of everything, whether it's spray paint, acrylic, oil stick, whatever. My process, now that I think of it, is very texture-based. It's a very reductive process. You know, I know typically when you think of painting, it's very additive. You're adding layers, you're adding glazes, you're doing all that sorts of stuff. I realized that I was never really all that good at it. But if I add a bunch of stuff and take it away, I found out it looks kind of sick. So that's what I've been doing lately. I'm one of those people that has way too many hobbies. I love to read. My best friend is a political scientist, so a lot of the time we'll just kind of hang out and listen to music and have conversations about what's going on. I have aquariums. I love my aquariums, and there's this thing within the aquarium hobby. It's called aquascaping. This one guy, Takashi Amano, was kind of the real originators of this art form. It's basically underwater gardening, and so that occupies a lot of my time, and it gives me something to do with my hands when I can't think of what to work on. And honestly, just being outside, like looking around, taking the train, skateboarding, and doing all that sort of stuff. It kind of depends on the series of work. If I'm talking about these tile paintings in things kind of that nature that don't involve formal painting on like canvas or board, I'm really trying to just analyze textures in the place I live. I do live in a pretty urban area, and things are always changing and things are always happening. I like to look down and I think looking down on the sidewalk and looking down on the street and, you know, not dozing off kind of helps with that. For my more formal paintings, it's very, I say formal like it's an academic word, but for my paintings on board, it's a very intuitive thing. Ultimately, they're based off of the same forms of mark making that my other work is based on, so those textures and those influences do play a big part. But a lot of the time, because they're very spontaneous, it's very much an act of doing something, seeing what I liked about the mark I made, seeing what I hate about the mark I made, and trying to balance those out. And it's like a constant battle of balancing those things out until I end up with something I'm kind of satisfied with. I do keep a sketchbook. I'm not very good at drawing, especially when it comes to figurative or real things. For murals and things I paint, they're very graphic. I do a lot of like drafting and stuff for that because that's what I'm more capable of. I do a lot of photo documentation work as well because of that. But I guess a big part of my documentation process too is just seeing things and kind of making a mental note of them. I write notes about titles and things, but most of it is just making a mental note of it and maybe taking a picture of it when I see it. A lot of the ideas that, you know, if I write down and I don't look back at it, or photos I don't look back at, or if I don't even feel like it's worth taking a photo of, or writing it down, it probably wasn't all that good to begin with. And so, you know, having a lot of ideas is one thing, but having good ideas is not. So definitely like taking a lot of time thinking, sitting, processing over like weeks and weeks or months to think of, you know, what is the idea that's actually going to look good when it's executed versus what is just some stupid thing that I think is really profound in the moment. It's definitely like it's a process to weed those out. I'm working on 2 series right now. I'm working on a series of scratch paintings, like these fellas right here. Originally, they're actually inspired by bus stops, which is kind of funny. In Calgary, they always throw aggregate on the ground in the winter instead of salt or something like this, so that cars don't slide around. And because of how narrow the bus stops are, when people are waiting for the bus, oftentimes they'll put their feet up on the glass. And when they do that with the aggregate on the ground, they create these like rough sandpaper marks that kind of speak to the scratchity that's already in the bus stops. And I just thought those marks were crazy. So I figured I'd try to formalize them and kind of talk about their motion, and that's ultimately ended up to these large abstract works. And the other works I'm doing at the moment are paintings on tile. They're very much meant to mimic the tile walls that you see in train stations, public restrooms on the side of, you know, big banking buildings or in tunnels or whatever. Really talking about the the textures that are left on them and kind of the physical sculptural quality of those marks. I'm making those paintings in order to try to recontextualize those marks. At the moment, I'm working on a pretty large scale for them, but I have some upcoming plans to try to shrink the scale, and in the same way that a lot of like landscape paintings or realist paintings are kind of shrunk and formalized. The biggest thing about my work is I just want people to look at the world that they live in through critical eyes and recognize that although it's easy to get lost in the world of looking at your phone or whatever, that there are people in this place, and those people have different stories, those stories have different meanings, and that politics is important.